Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There it is, so you don't miss any of our football content this season. It has been, if I might say, fantastic. Our Week 13 reaction presented by Uber Eats. Get game day deals all season long at Uber Eats. There's only one place I go for tickets, and it's Game Time. They have a new feature called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. When I want to go to a basketball game, football game, concert, whatever, I just click on the event I want to attend, and Game Time gives me a seat preview and offers me the super deal, so I get the best bang for my buck, always. Game Time also has the lowest price guarantee, or they will credit you 110% of the difference. How cool is that? Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account. The code is Colin. That's me, C-O-L-I-N. $20 off your first purchase if you do that. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code Colin, C-O-L-I-N, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Well, former scout for the Philadelphia Eagles watching his Eagles again start slowly, explode in the second quarter, dominate the fourth quarter. You know, it would be easy to say, well, Justin Tucker missed a couple of field goals and a PAT. It certainly didn't help. It forced Baltimore into some weird play calling going for it later. But, you know, it is, after a while, something goes from different, coincidental to a trend. And Philadelphia, they feel like a heavyweight fighter that feels you out, kind of tries a few things, and then eventually they just wear you out. And Baltimore's a physical team, and I just kind of felt, I mean, Jalen Hurts only completed 11 passes, but Philadelphia, and I think we've talked about this, we've given Detroit a lot of credit as the best team. I don't know if they met today with the Lions' injuries. I think I may take Philadelphia as the NFC's top team. What say you?
Yeah, when I see a headline of Jamal Adams signing with the Detroit Lions, they got issues with injuries. I think the star of the day, and he's gone a little under the radar because Saquon looks, I don't know, like Walter Payton right now, is Vic Fangio. I mean, they wanted him 2 years ago, and that Jonathan Gannon, he got the job last minute, and it threw Howie, and they're hiring off, and he ends up in Miami. Early in the season, it didn't quite look right. I would say this last month, I mean, the young DBs, Mitchell, their first-round pick, is a star. Cooper DeJean looks fantastic. Immediate plug-and-play slot receiver or a slot corner, which is now a starter in the NFL, right? Because every team. And then how about this Zach Bond guy? He looks like Brian Urlacher out there running around. You cannot watch an Eagles game all season long without him making, I would say, over under 4 impact plays. And this was a 1-year player who didn't sign for much, that was an outside pass rusher, special teams guy, and it's been well reported. And Fangio said, I think we can make this guy a middle linebacker. And I think he's going to be an all-pro this season. And obviously the pass rush, I mean, Jalen Carter has really kind of done what they hoped he would be. So to me, it's Fangio and the talent on defense.
I feel like the AFC is all about the quarterbacks, and the NFC is all about the front offices. Green Bay, I mean, they haven't missed on a tight end or a wide receiver pick or Jordan Love. Detroit, Philadelphia. I feel like those three teams, and I like Matt LaFleur, and I like Jalen Hurts and Jared Goff and Matt LaFleur. I think the NFC is ruled by front offices because you don't have as much star power at quarterback. I think Green Bay is a year away, but they hammered Miami. That thing was embarrassing. I look at Philadelphia, and you know what's funny about Baltimore? I mean, they're league leaders in penalty yards and flags. Missed field goals. I like John Harbaugh. I love Jim Harbaugh. It's not that they're they just don't quite feel, you know what I mean? I kind of, when I watch Baltimore, the other week in a game they played, Bill Belichick was ripping them on like the ESPN, like the Manning cast. He's like, okay, that's Philadelphia. That's Philadelphia. And you could tell he was kind of like as if he kind of was taking a shot at John Harbaugh, like, this team's got a ton of talent. They're never buttoned up. Is that fair? And again, it's not that I don't like John Harbaugh, but man, penalties. They just sometimes leave points and plays on the sideline.
I like the Ravens a lot coming into this game because I thought they matched up well against the Eagles. I'm like, well, their run defense is awesome. And offensively, how can you corral Lamar and this offense? And it actually flipped. They broke the run defense with Saquon as the game went on, like you said, with the fighter. I think when you look at Harbaugh, like, I would say in the Lamar era, him and Lamar have been disappointing in big spots.
Yes.
There's no disputing it at this time. They also had a weapon in their back pocket.
Yeah.
Like when I was a kid, if you had a guy that could hit 40, 50 home runs in the early 90s, it was a big curveball, like not many teams had. In golf, if you could hit it 300 plus yards 25 years ago, Justin Tucker is now shot. I did some math during the game. He was 8 of 14 from 40 plus coming into the game. Then he missed 2 more. So you're talking about a guy that felt like he was automatic from anywhere from 45 to 55 yards, who now is a 50% chance of missing the field goal. And let's face it, in this game, when they lined him up to kick the field goal, did you have any faith that he was going to make it? Because I had none, which is crazy. Just 2 years ago, you would have said, like, that's a lock. So you look at a team now that, the AFC is pretty open. We'll see how Buffalo looks tonight and how they finish down the stretch. Obviously, the Chiefs have a remarkable record, but they're pretty flawed. Pittsburgh, they actually look pretty good today, but Cincinnati's defense is atrocious. So it's Harbaugh has guys you've never heard of getting pick sixes, and that's how he's been doing it his whole career. The AFC is not quite what it's been at the top, so that benefits them if you just get in.
So if you look at the AFC, again, we're doing this before the Bills play. Kansas City's the 1 seed, Buffalo 2, Pittsburgh 3, Ravens 4, Texans, I believe, 4. Then it's Ravens, Chargers, Broncos would be, as of now, the wild card teams. So I really like the top 2 teams, obviously, in the AFC. Detroit is the number 1 in the NFC, followed by Philly. Seattle is the 3rd seed. Atlanta right now is the 4th seed. And then it goes Minnesota, Green Bay, Washington. So I like the wild card teams, Minnesota and Green Bay today, more than I like Seattle and Atlanta division leaders. Atlanta's really, we'll get into that in a bit. But I kind of feel, I do feel overall, and I talked about this last week, I think the top of the NFL is really strong. If we just said Philly, Detroit, Kansas City, Buffalo, would we agree those are the 4 best teams in the league?
Yes.
Yeah. And then I think
100%.
And then I think we get into this space where I would Minnesota, Green Bay, and Pittsburgh and Baltimore are all capable of winning a playoff game.
I actually right now like Green Bay and Pittsburgh more than I do Baltimore. Because every time I'm like, I think Baltimore can win the Super Bowl. You watch today, you're like, no, they can't. What am I talking about? And Pittsburgh, Russell has given them so much life on offense, and defensively on any given moment, TJ Watt can just create a touchdown, like at the snap of a finger. It feels like Lawrence Taylor or Reggie White. And that's how many teams have that in their back pocket. Like even Kansas City, like Chris Jones has had moments, but I view TJ Watt right now as the more dominant player. Now maybe Chris flips a switch come the playoffs. And the Eagles kind of have that, it feels like, with just all their playmakers on defense. And without Aiden Hutchinson, you're watching Detroit, which sucks for them. Usually when you play on Thursday, you get that mini bye. Well, the NFL, right, over the last 4 or 5 years has taken the 2 best teams that play on Thursday and put them on the following Thursday, so you just get a normal work week. So Detroit today was basically their Tuesday, which sucks given that was crazy on Thanksgiving how many guys were going down. It was, you kind of started feeling bad for them. I did.
I want to pivot to the Steelers. Pittsburgh 44, Cincinnati 38. This defense for Cincinnati, listen, the Steelers offense had 520 yards, 8 yards a play, 28 first downs. It was one of the great games in Russell Wilson's career. There was a real moment after the game when Mike Tomlin came up and embraced Russell Wilson. And I think it's pretty redeemable. We're talking about Aaron Rodgers like he still has it. Aaron's lost 9 straight starts. I mean, like to Denver and Bo Nix when they weren't even a thing yet. Russell Wilson deserves a lot of credit. He has worked harder and been more focused than Aaron Rodgers. You can say all you want about Russell Wilson, but he's a workaholic. He's totally committed to it. Sometimes he's almost hopelessly optimistic. But you know what? When he first got there, I thought, God, it's such a kind of a working class tough guy culture, and he's Ciara and Russell Wilson and the brand. We have to give him credit. He is acclimated well. He is fit really well. I don't know. I look at him, and there's two things that he does. He can extend plays, not like he used to, but he can extend plays, and he throws a beautiful deep ball. John, I'd argue that that's enough for them to win multiple playoff games.
Especially if they're at home, right? And being at home is something that has not been kind to them because they've been playing on the road so often because they've been winning 9 or 10 games in the regular season beside the 2020 season. So the stat when we rattle off they haven't won a playoff game since 2016, well, they haven't been a great regular season team for a lot of those years. And when you're playing on the road, especially in the AFC, you're talking, especially the last 5 or 6 years, you're talking Kansas City every year, New England for a long time, now Buffalo. These are very, very tough places to go play. We saw last year they went into Buffalo. Like no one, the game would have to get so weird for them to have a chance, and it kind of did. But I think the best part about football, and you see this in college and the pros, like, yeah, does not feel like a Pittsburgh Steeler, right? The way he talks and his brand. But if you make plays and you win, no one gives a shit. In college, if you're not from the South and Alabama or LSU hire you and you immediately start rattling off 11, 12 win seasons and being in the semifinals and the national championship game, no one cares. But if you didn't play well, they would have turned on. Russell came right in and elevated them. And today's a good example. I mean, the game opened up with him throwing a pick six. Now it was, Pickens fell, but still, I went, ooh, this could get weird. Burrow's hot. You spot them 7. Even Tomlin, I watched a clip of his press conference. He's like, impressive. We spotted them 7 points before you could even blink. And they never, and listen, Cincinnati's defense
it's
is
atrocious.
It is really embarrassing. I mean, Joe Burrow's having a great season, and they don't have a shot.
I talked to a GM yesterday about, I said, if you're Joe Burrow, you're trapped. We look at Caleb Williams, which we'll get to later, and you think, oh, he's trapped. But like Joe Burrow, T. Higgins may not be a great one. He's probably a 1A somewhere. He'll be the winner in this. He'll go to a really good team. Jamar Chase and Burrow are going to be in Cincinnati. Tobin, the GM, this has never been an organization that's been a deal-making organization. They're the opposite of the Philadelphia Eagles. They're passive. They're not aggressive. It's a dysfunctional front office. They're not well heeled. They don't have a lot of money. Cincinnati is the Eagles opposite. They'll keep paying Marvin Lewis or Zach Taylor forever. They'll never allow dead cap coaching money. They're just different. And I was looking at T. Higgins today, and I'm thinking, you know what? He'd be better off ending up with a really good football team. Like, I don't know, you can name it wherever you want to go, but there's going to be a football team out there that goes, you know what? We're a receiver away. We want to go get a grown-up wide, because these days, John, people will pay for one big receiver. It used to be years ago, you'd pay a receiver, the old term diva receiver. You'd be like, oh boy, what are we into now? T. Higgins is no problem. He'll go out and play. But I just watched Pittsburgh, and for years we've always acknowledged they draft and develop well. They're great underdogs. They're tough, but they lack the creativity offensively. And Russell, between the deep ball and the movement, he gives them a little creativity. By the way, when Ben was younger and moved well, he gave them the deep ball and the ability to create. I'm not saying Russell's Big Ben in his prime, but it does look a little bit like those teams.
Well, I think Tomlin had a big problem on his hand the last couple of years with the offensive coordinator. Yeah. I can't even think of the guy's name, but it was getting pretty ugly. Remember last year he got fired in season, and he hired Arthur Smith, and it's completely changed them. And you've watched as the season has gone on, and they went to Russell. Like, how did they seal the game today? They went with the Justin Fields run. So they've been able to incorporate, like, Justin Fields for a backup. He's probably one of the more famous backups in the league, if not the most famous. And obviously Russell at one point, I know he was kind of injured, was also by far the most famous backup. it takes a pretty special personality to handle that. And then it takes a good offensive coordinator, because it's not like Tomlin sitting in on the quarterback meetings and the offensive install. So a lot of that is on Arthur Smith, where you see North Carolina's interested in him. Of course they are. Like, he's clearly a pretty impressive offensive mind. And anytime you have these CEO head coaches, John Harbaugh, Jim Harbaugh, Mike Tomlin, Pete Carroll, whoever they hire, especially for the offensive side of the ball with John, Mike, and Pete, it can make or break their season. And that Arthur Smith, you could argue him and Fangio, two of the better coordinator hires in all of major college and the NFL this offseason, because how would he not be in the mix for coordinator of the year right now, what they're doing in Pittsburgh? Najee Harris, how about him? I thought he was kind of a bust. He looks fantastic.
Yeah, it really is. It is interesting. Now for a segment called Making It Look Easy, brought to you by Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. Today, Russell Wilson, 3 touchdowns, 414 yards in the Steelers' wild win over the Bengals. Just like Russell made it look easy, Morgan & Morgan does the same thing to submit a claim. Over 100 offices nationwide, more than 800 lawyers, $15 billion recovered for their clients. They have a proven track record of fighting to get you full and fair compensation. Morgan & Morgan has been fighting for the people for over 35 years. And if you're ever injured, just go to forthepeople.com/Colin or dial pound 529 to check out America's largest injury law firm. Winning in the NFL is hard. Hiring Morgan & Morgan is easy. And we have a bunch of games we can hit on. I don't know if this is the next most interesting game. I want to talk about the Bears, Seahawks-Jets, Chargers-Atlanta, a lot of college football. But Minnesota today beat Arizona 23-22. And I think most people view Kyler Murray as this superstar player. And, you know, a little enigmatic, but a superstar player. But it was Sam Darnold, who in the last 3 games is 3-0, 112 passer rating, 6 touchdowns, no picks. Kyler had an egregiously bad interception, and on a couple of big drives, 2. One was atrocious. And Darnold now, once again, had a winning drive. He wasn't great on third down. They didn't have the ball a lot, but they were hyper efficient. They only had 3 penalties. And I keep waiting because, you know, I love Darnold. I preferred him over Baker. I thought he was a bigger, more athletic with a better deep ball arm. Baker better as a pure passer in the pocket with time. But I keep waiting for the shoe to drop. And I got to be honest, today Kyler was reckless. And I watched Sam Darnold, and I'm like, you know what? You brought this up last week. You think J.J. McCarthy is better, but off an injury, and they go get Daniel Jones, I don't know what they do. What happens if Sam Darnold wins 2 playoff games, John? Because today I'm watching him and Kyler, and I'm like, I trusted Darnold late in that game more than Kyler Murray, and I'm a huge Kyler Murray fan.
This is where I feel bad for the Lions. They're having the greatest season of all time for their franchise. And if they lose to the Packers on Thursday, which is a fantastic Thursday night game, and the Vikings win, they will have the same record. If I would have told the Minnesota ownership, the Minnesota front office, the Minnesota coaches, and every Minnesota Vikings fan, it's a pretty underrated fan base.
It's a great fan base.
I mean, that December 1st, you would be 10-2, and coming in today, I think he had 21. So if Sam Darnold would have 23 touchdowns. You would be 10-2 and 1 game behind with the Lions leaking major oil with injuries and in prime position to win the division, which we all agree, top 3 teams, best division in football right now.
Easily.
They would not have believed you. And this is, I don't know if you saw the story that I think Jeremy Fowler put out that, you know, the Falcons, if Cousins doesn't get it together, they will look to trade him this offseason. Hell, he could be benched over the next couple games. One, he's got a no trade clause, Atlanta. You're not exactly in control of this. That's a conversation for another day. But Sam Darnold, to me, if I was a team and you said Kirk Cousins, Sam
Darnold,
not even factoring in money, it doesn't even 100%. And then when you factor in one guy's making $40 million, and you're like, is he getting that? But even if he did, I would rather if all money's equal, I will take Sam Darnold every day of the week. And again, look who likes him. Kyle loved him. And they didn't want to lose him. They couldn't compete with a $10 million, what Minnesota gave him. And look what he's done. And I stand by it, because today I was watching halfway through that game. You went, God, Minnesota finally coming back to earth.
I thought too. Arizona, by the way, if you go look at the yards, they dominated time of possession, like 36 and a half minutes to 23. Marvin Harrison, 7th touchdown. If you watched the game up until the end, you felt like, oh yeah, this is Arizona, who, by the way, schizophrenic. Totally. I mean, Seattle, they lay an egg, and then they go on the road to, and I'm like, oh crap, they're back.
Yeah, and when he threw that touchdown to Marvin Harrison, you went, maybe this is just they lose 25-10 or something. And then I felt down the stretch, it wasn't even just that final drive. Sam Darnold was really good in the second half. And Minnesota's got really good coaching. I just don't see, with a guy who's now had multiple knee surgeries, who was a major project. Clearly, your team with your coaching staff is just built to win. This is the NFL. It's not the NBA where you're worried. Like the Spurs have been worried about 5 years from now for 5 years. It's like the NFL, you're just worried about week by week next season. No one's tanking. Carolina's playing their balls off every week. Everyone's trying. And now you're 10-2. Minnesota internally could be like, why couldn't we, if we were to win the division, what if we were to get the one seed? Why couldn't we why couldn't we make it to the Super Bowl? Right? I mean, they are, and if, again, a lot will ride on these January games, especially because probably some of them are going to be against the Packers and the Lions, who you're very comfortable playing and they're comfortable playing you. But this Sam Darnold thing, if things keep going like they're going, I'm not just letting him walk out the door because I just drafted a guy. We see it all the time. You've been hammering this home. People pivot faster than they ever have in the NFL. You make a decision, even they don't even necessarily know it's wrong. I just can't afford to let this guy walk. He's not 38. This isn't Rich Gannon at the end of his career with the Raiders. This guy's 26, 27, 28 years old. I mean, a lot of guys play for 10 more seasons in the prime of their career quarterback.
Yeah, and Sam has, I know him a little bit. First of all, very coachable. I think the year with Kyle Shanahan was huge. So his last 2 stops, he's gotten elite coaching. He's a very coachable guy. And, I think the other thing, there was a couple of plays late in the game. It may have been the last drive or the next to last drive. And Sam was rushed and the pocket got muddy really fast. And he squirreled around. And Sam was head up looking to make a throw. And I'm like, Sam, eat it, don't. And he didn't. And he went through a stretch this year in the middle. He had a couple of really bad picks. But again, he didn't early. Remember, we were surprised early. Ooh, new Sam. Then the game got a little fast, and I think he's trying to make plays. He's living up to the hype. And now he's come back down to earth. He had a really bad Jacksonville road game. They were 0 for 5 in the red zone. I don't know. I watched Minnesota. And also, we have to acknowledge this. You pointed this out. Let's say this again. I went to dinner with Steve Keim last night, who now runs the football for Clutch Sports. And he said, listen, you can say what you want about Brian Flores, but their personnel, they're overachieving. Like he's going to get a job. So this may be one of these lightning in a bottle where Darnold has the best season of his career. Brian Flores is there before he gets hired. Sometimes it happens. Like you get lightning in a bottle. This is not the Chiefs. It's not going to endure for 12 years or whatever. But again, last 3 games for Darnold, 6 touchdowns, no picks, lots of movement, 112 passer rating. And this is how much I pivoted. When he gets the ball late, between the coaching, Sam and Justin Jefferson, I'm like, yeah, he's going to get him into field goal position. He's going to get.
I think if we just put him in a category, and people are going to think I'm nuts, but his physical skills, and this is why people never in the league always believed in it and wanted to work with him. It's much closer to like the Mahomes and Josh Allen in terms of the way the ball comes off his hand. Now he wasn't playing well. Matt Rule in Carolina, like I watched Matt Rule in Nebraska, can't win games. Maybe Matt Rule's just a little bit overrated of a coach, right? Adam Gase, I haven't heard that name in 5 years. I don't even think he works in football anymore. So like I see this guy with Kyle Shanahan and obviously with Kevin O'Connell, like his skills and his maturation as a player, not everyone just hits the ground running. Most players cannot overcome dysfunction. Peyton Manning's an all-time outlier. He could have carried any franchise and made them relevant. Tom Brady could not have at 22, 23, 24 years old. Sam Darnold clearly could not, and now he's good. Is he like a Hall of Famer? I'm not acting like we still a long way to go in his career, but he has been excellent this year. Like I'd have to really study the NFC quarterbacks, but Jared Goff, I'm sure, is a lock Pro Bowler, but he would have to be in the Pro Bowl mix for the three NFC guys, right?
Absolutely no question. Thursday Night Football is on. It's only on Prime Video. Best season yet, packed with big rivalries and even bigger stars. Al Michaels, Kirk Herbstreit, Kaylee Hartung every week. Games you can't miss. Coverage begins at 7 Eastern with football's best party. TNF tonight, Thursday Night Football tonight. If you're not a Prime member, no problem. Sign up. 30-day free trial. Cancel anytime. Thursday Night Football, and it's on Prime Video. Restrictions apply. See Amazon.com/Amazon Prime for details. Okay, the LA Chargers go on the road. This would have been a loss for the Chargers most of their history. Beat the Atlanta Falcons 17-13. The Chargers are 8-4. I mean, it is remarkable what Harbaugh and Jesse Minter have done to the defense. It's the same damn guys. And now it's the best defense in the league. And what I loved about this game, this reminds me of Minnesota. That's why I want to go to this next. Minnesota was dominated at time of possession. Few penalties, big drives, efficiency. The Chargers, Justin Herbert, 16 completions, 147 yards. They only had 187 yards total. They're on the road, and yet they, first of all, 4 picks. The pick 6 up the sideline, I don't even understand what it was. It was like AI. Somebody slowed it down. That's the one where I'm like, oh my God, Kirk Cousins is washed. That is a 74-mile-an-hour major league fastball. He threw, it was bad. It was just like, holy shit, he has no fastball. So, but I thought my big take was it may be Michael Penix time. You may give Kurt one more start. But this is a game the Chargers have lost my entire life. You're on the road. You don't really, your offense just doesn't, it's getting, you just don't have a lot of playmakers. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago when I think they lost to the Ravens. We're like, they just don't have enough. They need a Zay Flowers. They need a number one. They don't have playmakers. So let's attack it. I'll attack it from that. Your thoughts on what to do with Cousins. Are we in the Michael Penix mode now?
Yeah, I mean, I would start him next week. Like, this is what are we doing here? The 4 interceptions. Now they, Tampa won today somehow in overtime since we started recording this, so they're 6-6. Now they have lost to Atlanta twice. They're also 6-6, and the Saints losing to the Chargers today. Obviously, they're out of it. So it's basically a 2-horse race. But Raheem Morris had comments at the beginning of the season when asked why his coaching staff was so large. And he said, because we're going to win, and when guys get hired off of our staff, we will have replacements already on them. It's like, Raheem, I like you. And obviously you've resurrected your career. Making comments like, this league's really hard. Ask Andy Reid, ask, Jim Harbaugh, ask John, like, come on, let's just take a deep breath before we start kind of pumping his chest out. And your quarterback's Kirk Cousins. We've all come around on, and then he tore his Achilles. And like you said, when that happened in real time, the pick 6, it just looked like a normal out route the guy jumped. When I saw the replay a little later, you're right. It felt like the ball floated in the air extra long. Even the DB kind of had to stop before he sprinted. And then you had to, here's the thing though. I got a text from Daniel Jeremiah, who calls the games with Matt Money Smith. And he said, Harbaugh's out here winning games with defensive players and castoffs that most people couldn't point out of a lineup. # coaching matters. And I had to immediately Google that player who had the pick 6, who was a 5th round pick. Like that's not Derwin James, who also had the game winning pick. But some of these plays are being made by randoms. Ladd McConkey is a good young player. He is their go-to wide receiver. And this team is about to win 11 games. I think Jim Harbaugh, like Andy Reid and Bill Belichick, probably, it's hard to ever surpass the 6 Super Bowls, 2 as an assistant. Andy probably ends up with another one, 4 Super Bowls. He won, was an assistant. Like, these guys are all-time, like Lombardi levels. How many coaches can just go back and Jimmy Johnson, college, pros, never left. Jim goes, dominates college, comes to the pros, dominates, goes back to college, wins a national championship, comes back to the pros and wins it. Who could do that? Like, I don't see who has that pitch. Yeah. Like, most guys really thrive in one. He's coming, and now he's in his style. Like, he has a specific way of playing his sport. And it not only translates, it immediately dominates.
Yeah,
like there were 4 interceptions against a guy that just got $100 million and made him look like a third string
well,
quarterback.
and also Jim does it with culture. So his fastball is culture. He is what Ohio State's Ryan Day isn't, which is Ryan Day. The schemes are fine, but what is Ohio State? You immediately, I can remember when he was at Stanford, Harbaugh goes in as a 40-point dog to the Coliseum, beats Pete Carroll. And I mean, they had like a confrontation at midfield, and it was like Pete was reeling. It was like, what in the hell? This is before they got good. And I can remember like his second year, I was talking to a friend. He was at Stanford. Stanford, he replaced, I believe, Buddy Tevens. They were a mess. And I remember this because it was about the second year, and Pete Carroll was still in the conference. And I said, you're going to think I'm crazy. They're the most physical team in the conference. Stanford by year 2. And nobody was paying attention to him then. What he's doing to the Chargers, they are so physical. And he also, I was talking to Jordan Schultz the other day. His dad's Howard Schultz, Starbucks founder.
Yeah.
And I said, what's your dad's greatest strength? And he said, my dad's a really great delegator. His ego wasn't in control. He hired really good people and he delegated. And I've heard that before from really good CEOs. Harbaugh does that, like with his general manager, with Jesse Mintor. He knows what he doesn't know. And what he does know, he's relentless in attacks. You watch this Charger team, it is, I mean, the other thing, like Brandon Staley may never get another job. I mean, he will never get another head coaching job. It's the same players. In fact, I'd argue it's worse because they don't have Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. They have no playmakers.
It's much worse. By the way, on Jordan's dad, Howard, the Acquired podcast with Howard Schultz on how he built Starbucks is basically just him talking to these two guys from start to finish, how they built Starbucks. Amazing listen. They are much worse. Keenan Allen just had a couple touchdowns on
He was
Thanksgiving.
fantastic.
Keenan Allen's still a good player. What would Keenan Allen, what would they do? And listen, I know they had to. And who did Harbaugh choose? The two guys in the trenches. What did he do with the first pick? Part of what I think you see a lot of this, and the Giants got crushed for this, and we've talked about this over and over. They have a clear identity of what they want and what they need. There's no guessing game. They're not just feeling it out as they go. Go back to the Michigan game, which Michigan's best players are still Harbaugh's guys, those defensive linemen, especially those defensive tackles, and the offensive linemen. Like, he knows, go back to Stanford. Where did they start dominating before Andrew Luck showed up? Offensive linemen and running backs. And he wore people out. And what is Howie doing right now with the Eagles? Jalen Hurts is not throwing for 400. He doesn't look like Joe Burrow. He's not throwing for 350 yards a game. They are hammering you. They are wearing you down. Even the Ravens, who have all their defensive linemen, every team in the league would line up to sign, all of them. And they just get worn down over time. Why? Because I got a first rounder at right tackle. I got a second rounder at right guard. I got a center that I drafted in the second round. I got a left tackle that was a former first round pick. You just go down and it's just the Harbaugh's the same thing. And everyone thought he was crazy when he took alt number 5. It's like, you need wide receivers. It's like, what the fuck are you guys talking about? At the tip of my spear is my offensive lineman. And that's coming from a former quarterback. And I think a lot of guys pivot from their strategy, and he never did. He never did. And I don't know if it's just full on belief in himself, if it's just the only way he knows, but a lot of guys would have got scared off at different points in time. I mean, look at Ohio State. They've completely revamped. They're much more of a spread slinging around. That's not the Ohio State that's dominated my entire life. And, Harbaugh, this team, like, they have a ceiling, obviously, because it's the NFL and, they only have so many guys. But they won 5 games last year. 5 games. To pick Kirk, I mean, that might have ended Kirk Cousins' Atlanta career. I wouldn't bet my life savings on it, but I mean, there's a decent chance that by Monday or Tuesday, it's like Kirk Cousins they're going to try Michael Penix this week, right?
And by the way, if that works, it's very Flacco to Lamar Jackson, where Flacco started, has had like a rough 3-week stretch or 4-week stretch, and they said, we're going to go with Lamar. If I recall what happened, they went with Lamar in week 11 his rookie year. Well, Penix would go in like week 13 or 14. That I had never had a problem. Kirk Cousins, Michael wasn't ready. Kirk Cousins gets you to 6-6. You lead the division. He pivots out. You segue to Michael Penix, who's been able to now sit and learn from a pretty good OC. I wouldn't be surprised if Penix went in. You don't know how to defend him. Nobody's got tape on him. You have no idea what to do with him.
My issue, and I know you and a lot of people, the quarterback position quadrupling down on it. My issue with it was Michael Penix, at the time free agency hit, a lot of people didn't think he was a first round pick. So they had the 8th overall pick. So if they really did love him as much as they ended up loving him, they would have known they could acquire him. Why not allocate your resources? Hell, give Sam Darnold $18 million for 1 year. Like, I think it shows a little haphazard. Yeah. They kind of the coaches fell in love with him more in April, and they had already signed Cousins. Because now you're in this weird spot. Cousins had a lot of leverage when he signed there. He has a no trade clause. Now, if he's not going to start in 2025, it's not like he wouldn't waive that, but his value clearly is not as high as it just was this last offseason. Games like that, you're just basically offloading him, and, your owner, which is not the GM or coach's money, but gave him a lot of cash, and it impacts your salary cap. So it's just, you're now 6-6, and who's picking them in the first round against Green Bay or Minnesota? I mean, hell, or even Detroit. Not a soul. They'll be an underdog at home, won't they?
Absolutely.
In that game, I would imagine.
It's time to look at this weekend's tastiest matchup, Sunday Night Football, brought to you by Uber Eats. Seahawks 26, Jets 21, Aaron Rodgers' 9th straight loss. Seattle's now taking control of the NFC West. And by the way, this game is weird. You had to watch it. So Seattle, Geno Smith, they had this weird red zone where they had 7 tries from the 5-yard line. He got 0 points out of it. But it was really interesting. The Jets, by the way, John, are in the running for the number 1 pick. So the Jags, Raiders, and Giants have 2 wins. New England, the Jets, the Titans, and I think it's Carolina, have 3 wins. Because Carolina lost in overtime when we started this. The Jets are in the mix for the number 1 pick. But what was really interesting after the game, first Aaron failed on another comeback drive in the 4th quarter. Okay, Darnold had another successful one. Baker, by the way, wins in overtime. Aaron has another. I think he's had 6 this year, a half dozen chances to win a game late. It's been 1 or 2 plays. But what was interesting is Aaron missed a wide open Garrett Wilson in the end zone, and it was a pretty pedestrian play. It would have given the Jets a 28-7 lead. And on the road, Seattle, I don't know if they have the firepower because Sauce Gardner was giving DK Metcalf troubles. I mean, he'd kind of taken him out. I don't know if the Seahawks win that game. And after the game, Aaron said, it's always one play, and I wanted to just go timeout. It was 1 play. It was your miss. And then, by the way, he had a pick 6. Remember, right after that, it was a pick 6. And it was like, okay, total game changer. But when that happened, that pick 6, I started writing notes down. And I just said, where would I put Aaron right now in the league? And J-Mac and I have talked about this on the herd. He is not a top 15 quarterback. I don't care what anybody says. Like, I'm watching him. I don't trust him late. He's got a little mobility, not as much as most guys. I don't know what you do with Aaron Rodgers. This thing, I don't remember a great quarterback, John, ending a career like this. I mean, Favre, remember, was 8-3 with the Jets, right? Got hurt. He went to Minnesota and just tore the league up the next year. This is a really, I almost think I mean, he's going to be a Hall of Famer, but it's almost a legacy affecting year. Like, he has aged much faster than I thought.
Well, a couple things. You need to go to the NFL page, get the Leonard Williams highlight of that pick 6, and copy it and send it to Lincoln Riley and say, you need more guys that look like this that you guys used to have. That's what you need. I thought early in that game when the Jets were good, you're like, are the Jets going to blow these guys out? Well, they had a bye week. And what happens when Steph Curry or LeBron James miss a couple weeks? They usually look good when they come back. Why? They're fresh. Older guys. And as the game went on, he's an inaccurate player. You said top 15 quarterback. I don't think he's a top 25 quarterback. I mean, he was 21 of 39. He's objectively inaccurate when you're watching him. These balls, the Garrett Wilson play is one for, I don't know, up until he tore his Achilles, he would make with his eyes closed with his left hand. And there are other plays over the middle where, I don't know he's not seeing ghosts, but he's so rattled and sporadic in the pocket because he knows he can't really run around. Early in the game, he had a couple runs. You're like, oh, that looks like a little old Aaron. But as the game goes on, I don't know if it just kind of slows down. Older guy, then he doesn't move as well. And inaccuracy. Like one thing he dominated, he had an arm like Favre, yet he was accurate like Drew Brees. Now I feel like when the ball's coming out of his hands, he doesn't know where it's going. And I think he was so pinpoint accurate. I mean, that separated him when he was with Green Bay. He would hit these guys in the hands on every different route, whether it was short, intermediate, or long. And now you're watching these balls on pretty basic, like over the middle crossing routes, guys reaching behind them, getting destroyed over the middle. I just think, I don't know all the body mechanics, but from the Achilles, if he doesn't trust his lower body, there have been stories about him being banged up, which I'm sure, like, no one's ever questioned. Like, Aaron's tough. Yeah. Like, Aaron's been getting hit hard for a long time. Like,
he got smoked on the final throw today. Yeah.
Destroyed. Honestly, I was like, is he going to get up? And, like, it's not, the toughness is not his problem. I think his skills now are, like, tangibly deteriorating. And that's where, you go back and forth about him playing next year. I just think that the new coach and the new GM, whoever comes in, you are going to want a fresh start. And if you're Aaron Rodgers, are you going to want to keep going through this? I think Schlereth has been saying this for years. Every player worth their salt notices themselves first on film and goes, this is hard to watch. Right? Before your career ends, you're like, is that me? That's not me. That can't be me. And Aaron has to watch. I mean, this is one of, what do you think? Top 5 talents of all time at that position. And now he's making plays that people that he's been laughing at for a decade and a half. He can't even come close. You missed the Garrett Wilson one, which is bad for him. I think it's more of the basic routes that his receivers are missing behind. He doesn't know where they're going. And it's tough to watch. And this team, they are no lock to win any game. Any game.
He's aging like Dan Marino. So, and I've compared Marino and Aaron Rodgers because aesthetically, they're just beautiful throwers of the football. But at the end, Marino couldn't move. His legs were shot. He wasn't putting in the time. I mean, when Jimmy Johnson got there, he wouldn't show up for off-season workouts. I mean, he wouldn't show up. Well, Aaron is going to Egypt. I mean, Aaron's doing his own thing. And when you're told how beautiful you throw a football and how great you are, yet Brady, even as he was winning Super Bowls in New England, people said, well, he's a system quarterback. System quarterback. Patrick Mahomes constantly hears, well, it's Mahomes or it's Andy Reid. I mean, Mahomes is great. We know that. But, I mean, let's be honest. Mahomes throws a lot of bad picks. He's got the smartest coach, Travis Kelce. And that stuff, or Lamar Jackson, you're not a good passer. Josh Allen, you can't beat Mahomes. It motivates these guys. Aaron was basically told for 15 years, you're better than Brady. Marino was told for years, you're actually better than Elway. And I think you're human. I think I've always been driven by the critics, not by, positive press or whatever. So I think Aaron hasn't put the time in, and I think you can tell how hard people work. Like Drew Brees at the end had lost his deep ball. He was crazy accurate. He was tremendous at the line of scrimmage. Drew Brees slowly, gradually eroded. Aaron has gone off a cliff. Big Ben, by the way, not known as the hardest off-season workout guy, got old really fast. Cam Newton aged very quickly. Aaron reminds me of Marino. Like he is just not. I said top 15. I mean, if I said to you, I'll name a quarterback, and you tell me if you take this quarterback or Aaron, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold.
Darnold. You're gonna struggle to name.
Okay, let me.
I mean, it's what I'm.
Okay,
I'm telling you.
Last 3 weeks, Bryce Young.
Bryce Young. I've watched them. Carolina's played well.
That's right.
Because of him.
No, he's played great. No, so you're with me on this. I just don't think. I think he's been adored for so long. He hasn't put the time in, and now you can see it. By the way, since Robert Saleh has been fired, the Mets have 2 wins and the Jets have 1. That tells you about Robert Saleh being fired. What a catastrophically dumb move it was.
I think his whole game, I mean, I would say his pass, when you close your eyes and you think of Aaron Rodgers, it's backpedaling off the back foot and throwing a dart. Where when you think Brady and Manning, when you think the three guys of his era, it was Brady, Manning, and Rodgers. Two guys had nothing in common with the other. I mean, Tom Brady once said, football is the most unique sport. I couldn't play any other position in high school, let alone the NFL. They didn't move outside of a couple yard radius. It's why they practice fundamentals. If you went to a Tampa Bay practice when Tom Brady was 45 years old and showed up for the first 20 minutes, he's in a full-on sweat practicing his footwork. Well, Aaron never had to because he could always get away with that. It's like a basketball player who's the best athlete in the league who's not a great shooter. Now, Aaron technically was, but once the athletic ability deteriorates, you're in major trouble if your fundamentals aren't great, right? Chris Paul's never been that fast, so he's always been able to play a certain style. Brady and Manning fell off a cliff because his arm, like Drew Brees, did not work. Not because he didn't know everything to do. Aaron Rodgers doesn't play like those guys. And you watch him play now, the way he's kind of willy-nilly with his foot. Jordan Love is a carbon copy of him. But Jordan Love, in the prime of his career right now, that arm, it fires out. You're like, geez, Jordan Love's got a hose. Aaron's arm, let's face it, just a little older. It's not as great. And whether it's, again, the biomechanics of his lower body with the Achilles not being the same, it's just off. But he doesn't sit in there and work his footwork like Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, or Tom Brady, because he's never had to. And that was always the knock. And the one year he had a bad season, the McCarthy year, that McCarthy got fired, and then his last year with LaFleur, he kind of gets off doing his own thing. And when he gets a little off, the fundamentals go out the window with him. They never, ever. Peyton Manning sucked because he could not throw and his shoulder let him down, not because his footwork and his body was off in the pocket. Same thing with Drew Brees. Same thing with Tom at the end. Tom just didn't want to get hit. Don't blame him. 45 years old. Aaron's mechanics and I would say fundamentals are just not good. They never have. And he got away with it. And now you're watching him. I have a hard time seeing him play next year. And listen, I understand not many jobs, no jobs, unless you're like the CEO of Apple, are going to pay you $40+ million a year. But he's made a lot of money, and now he's getting peppered. He's 40 years old. Who's going to trade for him if the Jets don't want him? Like, what are really his options? Like, it's probably a situation that you don't even have a chance to win in the summer. Like, it's pretty clear. So if I had to guess right now, we're down the home stretch of Aaron Rodgers playing NFL football.
Sunday night is brought to you by Uber Eats as the official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Uber Eats has the best game day deals all season long. Order now. I often do for game day. I want to go back to Thursday and talk about one team. So the Chicago Bears. Eberflus has been fired off that insane, egregiously bad coaching snafu. So I saw Caleb Williams Saturday. I went to the Notre Dame-USC game, and I sat in Jen Cohen, the athletic director's box. He was there. So was his dad. I said hi to Caleb and talked to his dad for a second. Remember before the draft, I went on the air and I said, I've heard Caleb's got some reservations about the Bears, but he didn't want to be the bad guy. And the next day, Caleb came out and said, no, not true. I'm going to go to the Chicago Bears. I'm going to go to the Chicago Bears. Well, the truth is, Caleb didn't want to hurt his advertising market, his influencer market, and he was going to be a good soldier. But I trusted my source is that, you can't look at the Bears. An educated, reasonable person, and that's Caleb, can't look at the Bears and go, this is a great place to go. And you're seeing basically what we predicted. I was told in the last month by an NFL GM, he thought the McCaskies were the worst owners. Bidwell's second, McCaskey's the worst. They're some of the poorest. Just an odd group. The president, is a former Big Ten president. A lot of opinions, not great on the details, I've been told. Eberflus over his skis. Ryan Poles has done okay. I love the Montez Sweat move. I love that move. Chase Claypool, people take swings and miss. I'm not going to judge him. Some of his drafting, Jalen Johnson. I like the Keenan Allen pickup. I talked to Cole Kmet this weekend. He was in the box with Caleb Williams. There's I don't know if Ryan
Poles extended Kmet. I mean, he's there for a while.
I don't know if he drafted him, but he extended him. But this organization, what is happening now is what Caleb and any reasonable person feared, is that I thought Caleb was good enough. He was the only quarterback in this draft like Andrew Luck. Didn't get the right GM, an impulsive owner. His coach got fired. Bad O-line. He was good enough. And Andrew Luck. Now, I don't think Caleb's as good as Andrew Luck as a prospect, but I thought he was one of these top 10 prospects. But the difference is this division is so damn good, is as good as Caleb is. I'm sorry. Again, Minnesota's well run. They don't have Super Bowls. I've always felt they're pretty well run. Green Bay's exceptionally run. Detroit now is well run. I worry that Caleb Williams is going to just be stuck having to compensate for an organization that's arguably the weakest in the league, because that Andrew Berry is a very good GM in Cleveland. We don't love the ownership, but we like the coach and the GM. I have a feeling here the Bears right now, along with Carolina, and people like Dan Morgan as a GM. They don't love Tepper. Are the Bears the most dysfunctional franchise in the league?
It has to be right up there. I mean, I personally have always thought once you have a lot of money and you run a business and you still are really cheap on things that really matter, like you kind of have a disease
Cincinnati
that holds the business back. Yeah, and I think you see this in all walks of life, even outside of football. Like eventually you got to pivot. Like Walmart, Sam Walton was notoriously very cheap. There came a point in time where he had to pivot with some of the big expenses with the company. And there were stories this weekend, and I gobbled up everything Eberflus, the firing, of them when they interview coaches, they fly them out and they put them in coach. And I had a buddy in the NFL that said when they were interviewing GMs, they put them all on like a shuttle. I mean, just things that in the NFL, in college football at the highest level, that are just viewed like any industry. There are certain standards for the highest level of your CEO, for your head coach, that is pretty embarrassing. And this is a franchise. This guy, a chiropractor at the gym, who just, whenever I see him, he loves this Sunday show with me and you. He found me through you, and he's a diehard Bears guy. And he was hammering, the Kevin Warren situation. And he's like, people don't realize this franchise has been owned by this family since the 20s. I would imagine for 60, 70 years, the economics of the league, or the McCaskey, Papa Hal, was a little different than it's become the last 20, 25 years. But philosophically, their thoughts on everything have kind of been engraved, from their grandparents, like the way they think about this. Hell, is it the grandma or whatever? Virginia McCaskey's like 100 years old. Do you think she views things like Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman, or like Les Snead and Stan Kroenke? How can she compete against that? Jed York's 45 years old, running around with Silicon Valley.
How about this? We knew that Al Davis was a pioneer and a visionary, and in the last 10 years got really murky and bad. Jerry Jones, visionary, maverick, last 6 to 8 years, that's a bad roster. So those guys weren't, that was an 8 to 10 year stretch where you're uncomfortable. I feel like Chicago's been like this for 25 years.
And I think whenever you have ownership that doesn't know what they're doing, Kevin Warren is kind of reported this morning that he's running point on the coaching search, and Ryan Poles will assist him. Colin, that is insanity. This is a guy that was hired to run the business and get them a stadium. You know the geography of Chicago better than me, but it again, through my buddy, said that they basically laid it all out for him in the suburbs, and they want to stay in the city, yet everything's there for them. They already own the land. It's like, you got to get the stadium built, not hire the coach. That should be Ryan Poles' job and the owner, but the owners want no part of it because they don't know what they're doing. And it's pretty sad. And this is where in the NFL, like Caleb was in a tough spot. This has gone worse than I didn't think it was going to go well. Like I didn't even view him as a playoff team. It's obviously been way worse. It was reported today Jalen Johnson lost it on Eberflus as he just gave his postgame. Hey guys, is adversity? It's like, no, we're not giving the cliche speech anymore in here, Matt. And he should have been fired in January. He should have been fired in January, because now you're repeating the same thing over and over. But it's interesting. You go, who's going to want this job? Actually, on paper, it's a pretty good job. They got a lot of players and a GM that comes from Kansas City, who's a former offensive lineman. I do think the Kevin Warren thing is as big of a red flag. If I have to answer, Eberflus and Ryan Poles this year answered to him, not the owner. Like Mike Vrabel's hanging up. He's not answering to Kevin Warren. Obviously, Bill, they probably wouldn't even interview them. Ben Johnson's going to have enough leverage. Like, I'm not answering to the team president that does not own the team. In Denver, Tenor, who is married into the Walton family, it's like it's all the same umbrella. So it's like, yeah, I answer to him. He is the family, right? It's not. This guy's an independent. This guy could be fired tomorrow, Kevin Warren. And if I'm Vrabel, I have to answer to him, who I don't think knows anything about football. Remember, he was the guy leading the charge to cancel football up through the middle of August. And if it wasn't for Jim Harbaugh and CJ Stroud in the Big Ten, he would have canceled football. And I know there's tumultuous times, especially depending on where you live, but that's something that, to me, that's why Jim Harbaugh was never working with him last year. A lot of people thought that they could hire him. And I just think the Bears, man, that's got to be one of the more embarrassing 3 or 4 game stretches that I ever remember. Like I saw some bad Jim Tom Sula, that year, but he didn't have specific games over and over. It was just a bad, like a joke. But these specific moments on Thanksgiving, I mean, how many people were watching that game? 25 million. The clock just kept ticking. You're like, what's going on?
It's the worst situational coaching I've ever seen in my life. Not, first of all, rookie quarterback against Detroit, short week, but throw him a life preserver. Like if it's year 3, I'm on Caleb's ass. He is a rookie on a short week on the road. Call a timeout. You can see him. Everybody's flailing.
I had a lot of scouting buddies crushing Caleb. Like, he's the quarterback. 21, 22 years old, short week, late in December, never played this long, probably exhausted, had led them back.
Good second half.
That's the coach. He's the defensive coordinator. He does nothing on offense. His only job is to watch the clock. Clearly, they're discombobulated. He should have called the clock the moment his knee hit the ground when he was sacked. It was a no-brainer. And honestly, I was surprised they fired him, weren't you? Or was it just so bad they had no choice? I expected the Bears to play it out the rest of the year.
Let's go to Michigan 13, Ohio State 10. We have to talk about a couple of college football situations. So I think this is the biggest in the history of this rivalry. It's got to be the biggest upset. Michigan passed for 62 yards, had 2 picks on the road and still won. I mean, Michigan hasn't thrown the ball. Michigan's a very easy team to defend. They can't pass. You can be hyper aggressive. So I thought one of the things I compared today in my car, I did a little thing on Twitter. I compared Ryan Day, the Ohio State coach. I wouldn't fire him, but there's a clear hole. He's Mark Richt. So Mark Richt had been a quarterback coach like Day, was an offensive coordinator like Day, and then got a blue blood job. And I always felt when watching Georgia under Mark Richt, he had several top 10 finishes, but in the big games, you never felt they got the most out of the roster. And that's exactly how I feel about Ryan Day, is that he can recruit like Richt. He's a nice guy like Richt. But those Georgia teams never had an identity. They just had really good players. Even when they had, like, I think Matt Stafford they would have moments and you'd be like, oh my, this team's the best in the country. And they won a lot of big games. He won 3 out of 4 games he coaches. And Ryan Day wins 5 out of 6 games he coaches. But they have no identity. And I thought that game, here's my take. So Ryan Day is one of those guys that, Urban Meyer, he wins at Bowling Green. He wins at Utah. He wins at Florida. By the time he gets to Ohio State, he has got a lot of confidence. His shit works. Jim Harbaugh, my shit works, right? Ryan Day, what does he fall back on? So remember when he got really defensive when old Lou Holtz took a shot at him and they won a game, and in the post game, he takes a shot at rickety old Lou Holtz. And I'm like, wait a minute. Why do you care about that? Because he doesn't have a history of success. Mark Richt did neither. Is that when Saban, Michigan State, LSU, Alabama, NFL, people can take shots at you. You have a formula that works. Ryan Day doesn't have a formula that works. He's 2-4 in bowls. He can't beat Michigan now 4 years in a row. And I thought the game plan was fascinating, John. He was trying to prove how tough Ohio State was in the first half. It's like, bro, you have major matchup advantages at wide receiver. He wanted to prove, hey, people say we're not. This game's always decided by rushing yards. I'm going to blow this whole I can't coach tough football teams, because he got very defensive with Lou Holtz questioning that. And this is Ryan Day, and we'll get into Lincoln Riley in a second. He's a little lost. When you start worrying about voices outside the building and narratives, and it starts changing your game plan. Their first half game plan was embarrassing. Like, what was it? He was trying to prove we can win tough. Just win the damn game.
You know, I've had this theory with politics for a while, that sometimes the media is detrimental to candidates and a certain party. And I think, you know, CNN and MSNBC, right, are in the headlines a lot, that no one's watching them anymore. They're losing a lot of viewership, but their clips go viral. And I'm on a million text chains that see them constantly. And they're constantly lecturing people that whether it was Biden's cognitive ability or that Kamala was a great candidate. And eventually the people are like, yeah, just come on. Yeah. Right. Pump the brakes. And I think for a long time, there has been a media apparatus that has told everybody, you Ohio State fans are lunatics. Lectured them that they're lunatics and this guy is X. Look at his record. And it's like, guys, most human beings now, over 30 years old, have been alive long enough to see Pete Carroll, Urban Meyer, Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, Dabo. Like, they know what a really good coach looks like. They also know that the Big Ten, beside a team or two every once in a while, is not very good anymore. Most of these teams, like beating Nebraska and beating Minnesota, when you're at Ohio State and you have unlimited resources, is not that impressive. So you are basically paid to beat Penn State, Michigan, and the other top teams that you play, whether it's Notre Dame or whoever you play in the playoffs and stuff. That's it. Like, you get no credit for beating the shit out of Minnesota, Nebraska, whoever. You better win those games, but no one cares. It's like James Harden scoring 50 against Sacramento Kings in January. Like, I'm sorry, no one puts any stock into that after a while. And I think everyone getting lectured constantly about Ryan Day. It's like, guys, we've seen him in these big games, and something's off. Something's off. And in this game specifically, right, the last couple of years, Harbaugh has had a team that was elite. So you get beat. It happens. Kirby Smart
last year, Michigan had better players than Ohio State.
They had 17 guys drafted or whatever. This year, we've all seen crazy games. In college, we've seen 20 plus years of insane. That, to me, obviously we've seen bigger outcomes like Vince Young. That was a national championship game, right? Or even Ohio State lost or won national championship. In a regular season game, I think that's one of the craziest outcomes I've ever seen in my entire life. Start to finish. Because not a person in the world, especially a Michigan fan, would have bet on Michigan. And as the game was going, you kept thinking to yourself, this can't be happening. But he tried to get into a heavyweight fight with the one thing Michigan can do. And Chip deserves blame too. Run it up the middle. It's like they're two good players with the defensive tackles. You have 3 NFL guys. But I keep thinking that after the game and everyone's shitting on Ryan Day, it's like, well, they've been lectured for 5 years that he's a great coach. And it's like, I'm just waiting for him to beat another. Like, we don't care that he's beaten James Franklin now 4 straight times. Like, you can't beat Michigan, which in this program clearly is borderline the equivalent of like the national title game at this point. And he loses against the other good teams when he plays them in big spots. So you're watching him and you go, the cockiness, the third base comment, most guys that get those jobs, Jim Harbaugh, to get the Michigan job, had to coach at San Diego, Stanford, and then win at the 49ers. You know, this guy had never been a head coach, and he got the job and handed to him by one of the greatest coaches of his era. So Ohio State fans literally know what it looks like with Urban Meyer. And you go, well, we're not that physical. We have this pass. And I was thinking about this too, because I've been critical of this guy for a long time. And Sarkisian's got Texas in the SEC championship year 1. And I'm watching him last night, and I went to watch him live. Sark takes his offensive guy like Ryan Day. Well, he's also the play caller. So half the game is his baby, right? And the program's his baby, but the play calling. Well, Ryan Day is like turned into this CEO, even though he's this offensive-minded guy. He has to hire Chip Kelly, and you're watching him on offense just look terrible against a Michigan team. Their best corner, Will Johnson, who might be like a top 5 pick, it's like Travis Hunter 2.0 at corner, is out. You're slicing and dicing. Like, what are you guys doing? Like, you're supposed to be an offensive mind, yet Chip's calling the plays, and then your team's not that tough. And I do think the look after the game where they plant the flag and he stands there. It just, listen, there's in the playoffs, so you're not going to fire him today. I don't see how this moves forward. Because I think it's very possible that this type loss, they could just lose immediately in the playoffs, depending on who they play. But I do think Ohio State fans, and I'm an Ohio State hater, but if I was in their shoes, I'd be tired of being lectured constantly by, and listen, I get it, Joe Klatt and all these guys, like Ohio State is a huge part of the business, and they're awesome. I like watching them too, but like we have to, Ryan Day, like Kirby Smarts, the Nick Sabans, like he's not, Urban Meyers, he's not even remotely on their level. It's not even debatable.
No, he is much closer to Mark Richt, who, George is better now without Mark Richt, who's a really nice guy. But I had an NFL GM tell me years ago, he loved drafting Georgia guys under Mark Richt. He goes, because if you drafted a Nick Saban guy at Bama, he'd already squeezed all the juice out of the player. He goes, these Georgia guys, like they still had 2 gears of shifting, like you were always like, oh, they're way better than you think. The other thing is that the transfer portal and the NIL have actually created parity. And I was talking with a guy today who's he runs a message board for Ohio State. And I said, you used to be able to, years ago, when you had 125 scholarships in the John McKay era for USC, you'd take like 4 running backs in the West Coast just to hog them, even if you didn't play them. And then we got down to 85 scholarships, and you can still do a little bit of that. Nick Saban can do it, Kirby Smart. Well, now a backup left tackle at, let's say, Ohio State, Louisville comes in and says, we'll pay you $300,000. You're a starter for us. Or a right tackle at Ohio State. Well, you want to be a left tackle and show the scouts that? Whoever's got money, whatever team, Texas A&M could say, come here, start at left tackle. So there's less depth. And then an Ohio State could lose an elite offensive tackle, where it's always been my whole life. The top programs have they have backups that would start, except for there's a first round guy in front of them. Well, that guy now just goes and plays at a lesser program. And so if you have an injury, so let's say you're Georgia and you lose, Brock Bowers, and then a tight end gets hurt, and the other tight end who you had, he got purchased by Wake Forest or somebody, or Oregon. Well, now your tight end's no better than the guy at Purdue. So these teams like Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State, if they have a key O-line injury or a linebacker injury, they don't have great backups. Those guys have been purchased in the NIL to go to lesser programs. And I know a program that was, Washington. they were in the Harbaugh, Michigan teams. They were like, okay, who's not starting that we recruited, who's a 5-star guy, who's behind a sophomore who's got 2 more years there. That's the game now.
I think Ohio State, though, if you look at this offseason, it's well reported.
$20 million.
I think these numbers, it could be 25, could be 18, could be 12. Who knows the actual number, but they spent a lot relative, and I think widely considered the most of any college football team. And they bought Ferraris. Caleb Downs would start for every NFL team immediately.
He's great.
They bought multiple sweet players, and then they signed Kansas State's quarterback, who some believe was not going to be their starter anymore because the other kid that was coming up that played this year, they were going to go to him, a little more dynamic. And you look and you go, well, if you're going to buy a Ferrari and a Range Rover and not have a garage, like it's a pretty risky move. Cam Ward was clearly the guy, but you go Chip Kelly, Ryan Day, I bet they wouldn't really love Cam Ward. Little bit, that's not really their type player, especially Chip.
Doing his own thing.
Will Howard, Will Howard, was much more their type guy. And you watch Kyle McCord at Syracuse, who just takes down Miami, who's had a pretty good year. They blamed everything on him last year. And listen, he was up and down for him. But I think sometimes in this NIL era, when you're paying people, especially quarterbacks, a lot of money, you can start doing finger pointing, where in the history of the sport, you would just give that guy a couple years to be your starter. And maybe that one year you look back, you win the national championship the next year, and you go, we lived through that. Look what Harbaugh did with J.J. McCarthy and that crew of guys. They lost that devastating game to TCU, right? It was hard to stomach a couple years ago. Everyone came back and they won it. Well, now in the NIL era, if you're just pointing the finger, you make a couple guys transfer, they're not good enough, you upgrade. You watch. How could you lose a game where the opposing team, if I told you at the start, how much money would you put on Ohio State if their starting quarterback threw for 60 yards and threw 2 picks? you'd be like, I bet they win the game 40 to
I thought
10
I
or something,
predicted
right? They'd
I thought
kill
it
them.
was going to be I honestly thought 38-13 would be close. I thought it was going to be a blowout.
You just can't fake toughness. And I've been around these coaches long enough and know these guys in these NFL teams and these programs. Some guys have it and some guys don't. And a small percentage truly have it. Like Urban Meyer, Nick Saban. It's not about like your size or you're a coach, but you're like everyone when you walk into the room, they kind of their shoulders. Kirby clearly has it, right? It's a small percentage of guys. And Ryan, he's not bad. It's like, but he was also handed, I think, the best program in the
Yeah.
country with
Yeah.
unlimited resources and will do whatever he wants. And they are regressing. 4 straight times to Michigan. I think he's a loss. We'll see who they end up playing in the first round. Let's just say they play
That's what I
Tennessee.
thought. Yeah.
If they play a team like and they lose, I mean, who are they going to hire? Like that's Mike Vrabel's not coming to college football in this era, right? So it's like do you hire the Iowa State coach? There's no, you might just get the same thing. Like you're probably not getting Nick Saban or Urban Meyer, the next version of that. So this is where they're kind of, it's not that bad, but it's clearly not good enough. Because if you can't get Michigan now, like you just beat a team that was so desperate they paid a kid $12-15 million to be their quarterback who's 17 years old. That's the team you just lost to.
All right, I want to finish up USC Notre Dame. By the way, Marcus Freeman, the coach for Notre Dame, Peter Schrager is reporting this, and this is the second person I've heard it from. Marcus Freeman, the Chicago Bears are interested, culture builder. So just throw that out there. That's being talked about in NFL circles. Notre Dame coach Marcus Freeman.
Would you leave Notre Dame making $10 million a year to the Bears if you had to answer to Kevin Warren? I would not either.
But it's interesting. They can't get rid of Lincoln Riley. He had his contract turned over. So it's 9 years, $90 million left. They just put $300 million into the facilities. Their collective's up to $18 million. So it's not a money issue. Their collective is now up to $18 million, I was told by an agent yesterday. That's not it. But it's so they're not going to get rid of Lincoln. They're not going to do it. USC is not going to buy him out. It's not the SEC. And his best talent is young, and their defensive line talent they've recruited the last 2 years is much better, blah, blah, blah. But this goes back to the Ryan Day thing. So he was handed an Oklahoma program, and the culture was set. And he was very clever. He was a better offensive guy than Stoops. So he goes to USC, and he doesn't really have to build a culture because Caleb Williams is so much better than everybody else in the conference. And they win 11 games, should have beaten Tulane, should have won 12. The following year, about halfway through, you're like, wow, they have to replace the defensive staff. He deserves credit for that. But I believe, and somebody said this to me, they said, why isn't he replacing offensive coaches? They have one good, not great offensive tackle in the program 3 years in. The backup left tackle is 6'2", 310. He's a center. They have one really nice draftable running back in 3 years. He's leaving. They don't have a draftable defensive player on this team. I think Kamari Ramsey, the safety, is draftable next year. Notre Dame's a better football team, should have won. It's not that. But now we're going into year 4. Forget the defense, which is better but not elite. They don't have enough good offensive talent. This quarterback they have is a ham and egger. I mean, he can't read the middle of the field or they don't trust him. Everything's up the sidelines. Everything's bubble screen up the sideline. They don't throw the ball over the middle of the field. What I am hearing is he has alienated LA high school coaches. I mean, their LA recruiting stinks. So USC is trapped here. They can't buy him out. He's gotten stubborn on the offensive coaching where they're just not getting outside a receiver. They just don't have good enough players. Forgettable running backs, forgettable tight ends. Don't have any tackles outside of Elijah Page, left tackle. When they signed him to a 10-year deal, you thought you were getting a steal. I'm not. This is the first time I look at it and I'm like, wait a minute. They're getting worse every 6 games. From the beginning of Caleb's first year to the next 6, to the beginning of year 2 to the last 6. This team beat LSU. At the end of the year, the last 3 years, they're not a very good football team. That is bad coaching.
If I would have told you in August that they would have one more win on December 1st than UCLA, you would have said, John, put down the drugs. I thought UCLA was going to win like 2 games this season. And honestly, it's not like they beat the brakes off them. That game probably could have
Yeah,
gone
in the
either
fourth
way,
quarter, it was
right?
close. Yeah.
So UCLA being 5-7 and you being 6-6, what a
You,
disaster
you,
for
you,
USC, for the Big Ten.
UCLA has no money in their collective. USC has 18 million. So it's not a fair fight.
Well, we were talking about Ryan Day. He inherits Ohio State. The recruiting mechanism was already set in place, like what Lincoln had in Oklahoma under Bob Stoops. It was already the guys flowing there. He just had to keep it rolling, and he's done that. It's why his disasters are 10-2. Everyone wants to fire him. Lincoln would die for that. Lincoln had to start it from scratch. To me, if you don't nail the best players in California, obviously the transfer portal has changed classes a little bit. That's pretty embarrassing. And I get this is not the Pete heyday, but like, why do Kirby and Nick and the guys that win in the South win? Because they nail the players in their region.
Yes.
And there it's harder because you have to recruit. If you're at LSU, at Georgia, at Alabama, Florida ever got good. Now Tennessee, you're all recruiting against each other. Like, obviously, Oregon has to come down to Southern California, but you still have a huge advantage. And everything, the nostalgia of the Reggie Bush, of what it used to be, it's just got to be gone. If you meet someone now, and young people that work for you, and, I'm around young people, like a 25-year-old was born in 2000, right? So that guy in the heyday of Liner and Reggie and Lendell White was 5 or 6 years old. So those guys that are now 18 years old, think about it, they were like the Clay Helton era. So this nostalgia of what used to be exists to me and you, or older people, not to the people that matter the most. And if you piss off these high school coaches, like the high school coaches are the lifeblood of someone's program because they funnel you guys. I mean, they're very, very important. Obviously now money changed hands, but to me, SC, like Caleb Downs, whoever the equivalent of those type players every year, it should be between Ohio State, USC, and Texas. Like, if they're not in on and why are Sark and Ohio State's roster so good? Because they're buying all the sweet players who are available. And obviously they recruit really well. What is Lincoln going to have a top 10 recruiting class this year in the nation? No. Top 20?
Like 12 to 14.
And here's the problem. Ohio State, even with Ryan Day, is not going anywhere. If they keep him for the next 5 years, they're going to win 10 or 11 games every year. Oregon clearly is going nowhere.
And listen, Washington,
we'll see what
Jed Fish can recruit. So Jed Fish will get that puppy to 9 wins fast.
And I've heard that they did not use much NIL money this year because they wanted to take a deep breath. They're going to be blowing it this year, so they will be aggressive. And Penn State, we've already seen the stats over the last 6 years or 7 years. If they would have had the playoffs, they'd be in it every year. And the one thing James hangs his hat on is recruiting, right? It's one thing you say James Franklin is great at recruiting, right? In-game coaching, recruiting. So you could argue this could nothing could change. 6-6, maybe they're 8-4, but I don't know. They'd have to catch lightning in a bottle. I don't know if you're ever going to see the Lincoln that they bought. I think this might be the new normal, which is when you're paying that type of premium. What that building, was that a home game for Notre Dame?
No, it was 75. It was 80-20 USC. It was Notre Dame was.
It's not an apathetic group yet, but they've got to be pretty down, right?
The Big Ten saves them because the Nebraskas, Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan, Ohio State travel so well. That's what really saves them. They'll have good revenue because of their collective. And let's be honest, 20,000 Big Ten fans in the winter, they're going to LA to watch that game.
To me, where you have no excuse, like, listen, you lose to Oregon, you lose to Ohio State, like maybe you're not as good. You cannot be losing to the middle of the
Maryland.
pack. And when you look at the middle of the pack in the Big Ten, what is the difference between UCLA and Rutgers and USC? Like that's what would really shake me if I was a USC fan. Is we're not just middle of the pack from a talent standpoint. When I watch them play, it looks the same. It's always been my defense of the SEC. It's like you just watch the SEC talent, and you're like, there's just more. Obviously, Ohio State and Oregon have the equivalent, but the middle of the Big Ten and the middle of the SEC, even if their records are the same, the talent discrepancy is obvious. Yeah. And USC's, they kind of had an easy schedule this year. Did they play Ohio State?
They did not play Ohio State, nor do they play Ohio State next year. So if you look at, I mean, Lincoln got a big break. He didn't get Oregon or Ohio State this year. He doesn't get Ohio State next year. So even, it's funny you ask, I looked at USC's schedule yesterday, and they have the home and aways. It's a really, they get Michigan at home. They get a couple of their, they get a couple of their tough games at home. So they don't have an LSU on the schedule. They play like Georgia Southern, Southwest Missouri State. They do an SEC out of conference schedule. So if you look at the schedule next year, John, it is, by Big Ten standards, it is a cakewalk.
The other thing is, and obviously football at USC is way bigger than basketball, but Musselman kind of has a history of winning and just kind of playing the part, right? So he just can shake some hands. He can put on a smile. He can play the part. Like, you don't get to be just grumpy Belichick in college, right? You can do that in the NFL as long as you win. In college, you do have to shake hands, donors, NIL. And now they're going to be comparing him to Eric Musselman, who's been winning at all these places. And then you got Lincoln, kind of ornery, scowls, not smiling. I think you ask yourself, and this is what I said from the beginning, does he even want to be there? Did he just get an offer so gigantic that no human could turn down, where it's like he was already so rich, he's looking at his bank account, my life, do I regret this? I think you got to say, if he could do it over again, is he the coach at USC right now? I think you'd have to say no, right?
I still think he believes, based on the recruiting, the interior defensive line recruiting the last couple of years, I think he believes next year's the season, but they don't have a quarterback. They don't have an elite quarterback, so shit, who knows? John Middlekauff, former NFL scout. As always, crushed it, buddy.